Let's put Eric Blehm's latest book, The Darkest White, on the bestsellers list, and I'll buy a copy today when it counts the most. Pause the show and buy the book. There's a link in my Insta bio, or just Google The Darkest White by Eric Blehm. The FNRad Snowboard Podcast is presented by Skyview Campers, Never Summer's innovative take on the tiny home. Designed and built in beautiful Colorado, check out skyviewcampers.com. Wired Snowboards builds quality snowboards by hand 10 minutes away from my house. Visit wiredsnowboards.com and order one today. Fixed bindings are easy to adjust, long-lasting, high-performance bindings built to have less impact on the environment. Check out fixedbindingco.com. Rip Curl Outerwear is designed to search further in the snow, offering strength, durability, and all-around performance. Rip Curl Outerwear's got you covered. NewGreens, 100% organic, vibrant green juice. Buy yourself some at NewGreens.com and use code FNRad at checkout for 20% off. The Boardroom Snowboard Shop, best selection, best prices, Vancouver's premier snowboard shop. The Boardroom ships to anywhere in North America, so go to boardroomshop.com or visit their stores in Vancouver and North Van. Support also comes from Mount Seymour, Grouse Mountain, Cypress Mountain, the Pro Standard GoPro accessories, and our friends at 1910. You can use code FNRAD at checkout for 20% off at 1910.com. The Haven's a center for transformational learning located on beautiful Gabriola Island. Plan a visit at haven.ca and use code FNRAD at checkout to save 10% off their Come Alive program. Eric Blehm grew up snowboarding in the San Bernardino Mountains as a kid in the early 80s. He became a sponsored amateur on the Look team for a season, and then his passion for snowboarding led him to become a writer for Transworld, where he worked his way up to editor-in-chief before leaving to freelance. For nearly 20 years, Eric embedded himself with elite military teams, writing 2 New York Times bestsellers, Legend and The Only Thing Worth Dying For. In his latest book, The Darkest White, Eric tackles the Craig Kelly story with intimate details of Craig's life from friends and family. The Darkest White brings Craig and his accomplishments into focus and tells the most intimate account of the devastating avalanche that claimed the lives of 7 people, including Craig Kelly, back in 2003. For this interview, I flew to LA, where Eric picked me up and took me to Big Bear Lake, where his family has an amazing cabin. This is Eric's story. Please enjoy.
I mean, it's the San Bernardino Mountains. It's called the Rim of the World, which is like, sheer drops. It's like you don't think this could be 2 hours from LA. It's, when you're driving, like you said, you're from Canada, you're BC, snowboarding dreamland, big mountains. Yet there's some legitimate mountains here. We don't get the snow that we used to, and or ever really have, but it does have enough to, again, in the beginning, it was our dreamland.
Yeah.
In the beginning.
So that spot you showed me yesterday, and I'll cut to the clip of it right now. Like, first board was a rental board. Hold on. That slicker that you have. Yeah. When you first rode it at that first spot, was that your board? Had you bought it at that point? No.
I had not bought it. I had a friend, his name was Carlos Royal. He goes by Wesley now. He's a great friend. He was a kid that just frickin' could blow through a Rubik's Cube and was good at everything. BMX, he had 7-foot tall trophies in his room. He was a god. Yeah. And of course he learned about snowboarding before anybody. And he introduced it. He was my best friend and he introduced me to it. And we would just go ride. We're Southern California kids. We used to ride the bus, the North County Transit bus to Moonlight Beach and Encinitas to boogie board and eventually surf. Or the gigantic adventure was driving up to the snow on Palomar Mountain, which is just a local mountain that has an observatory on it. And he learned about snowboarding by ads in, BMX mags, I think, at the time. And our local surf shop was called Ocean Snow, and it was a ski shop / surf shop in Escondido. And they had a snowboard for rent. and it was called a slicker.
Just one.
One. They had it, and it was come to find out much later that it was Steve Cathy, who was a GNS skateboarder back in the day, and he had created it, and at that same time and before, obviously, like Jake and Tom and Dimitri and all these other guys, Flight on the East Coast were way ahead of things. But for me, my introduction was this slicker, and I would throw on my surf booties over gray, big puffy moon boots and a pair of rain pants and whatever. And we would go up and just hike and make turns. And eventually we got it would have been 83, when his mom, I think, drove us originally. And then he got his driver's license early on in 84, I think. And that's when we made this big adventure, like 2 hours to Big Bear, because that's where the real snow is.
Yeah.
And as soon as we got past Snowline during this big snow, we just pulled over as soon as we could. And there was a little pullout, and there was a little Forest Service road that we just hiked up. That's where I took you yesterday. And that was the first day that I was able to link powder turns, and we did it by literally we rubbed paraffin or base coat wax on the bottom of that thing to speed it up a little bit.
Nice.
And that was where I first got that first enough speed where I could turn and actually evolve into a second turn. And it was maybe 6-7 inches of powder on top of a bunch of ice and bark and rocks and crap, and that was it. That was that moment.
This is quite a bit earlier than most people. For most of the people that I talk to, not all, but a good amount of them, late 80s.
Yeah.
It's found its way into the skateboard shops. Snowboarding's found its way into even snowboarding shops.
Right.
And the availability is there, and lifts are starting to allow it.
Yeah.
You're talking about 83, is that right?
Yeah. Well, let's see here. I graduated middle school, class of 83. So 83, 84 winter, in that December of the following year was when I think we had a real big dump, and that's when we went up to Palomar Mountain. And again, we weren't driving yet. We were 14, 15, and
wow.
And his mom took us. I mean, she had like a Cadillac. His dad was a real estate agent. She had this big Cadillac, and we drove up and parked on the side of the road.
And was there any issues with snow and stuff? Because you probably don't have snow tires being in Southern California.
Yeah, but a Cadillac, a big heavy Cadillac.
Doesn't matter. It was good.
It was, and she would sit there and, I think she knitted. I think she was knitting in the front seat while we went and hiked up the side of the run. Oh, hey, we're going to go to the next spot. And we would just take turns with that board. And he right away ordered, I think that following season, or maybe it was even that season, but he ordered a Burton Elite, the black and red Burton Elite. He got the 150 and with a little swallowtail, and this was one with the stand-up, no folding, red, hard plastic high backs with the Fastech buckles.
Yeah. First year bindings.
Yeah.
First year bindings.
And we, and then we didn't have, our family, didn't have the money that he had. And so at that point, my parents, without me knowing it, put a Burton. I did the 140. His was it was an Elite, and there was two. There was one with a square tail, and I think that was the one that I got, the Elite. And I think he got the Performer, is what he called it. And
Performer Elite. Yeah, I think that's what it was called.
Performer Elite, and then there was just the Elite. Anyways, mine was a square tail.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
And I think it was the exact price, and I went that route. So we figured we both have one of each.
So would you launch those boards off that rock that you were showing me in that zone?
We launched the slicker off rocks like that in that zone. I have pictures, and the slicker, I mean, you've seen it. It's got two bungee cords.
Yeah, I'm showing that right now.
And I have a photo somewhere. I wish we took photos back then like we did, but I have a photo of me going off of a side hill on that slicker, kind of leaned back, and it was just all we had. We figured if we could land it and ride it 4 feet, we stuck it before we completely tumbled.
Yeah, because you start going too fast down fall line on those things, and you need to bail out to stop yourself.
And you're
from
as far as heel hold down and toe hold down, we had really good. Our toes only lifted 3 inches, and our heels only lifted 2 inches. So I mean, it was serious, but it was fun, and we loved air. We were BMX kids. I grew up in a place where there was a lot of dirt, Valley Center, California, so I wasn't really into the skateboarding, but we would build stupid jumps on the BMX, and and snowboarding. Honestly, it was a lot softer. I mean, this is snow.
84, 85 BMX is peak BMX.
Yeah.
GT freestyle team, Haro, Dennis McCoy and Matt Hoffman starting building like mega ramps for
totally.
For BMX.
He was Carlos had his GT. Greg Hill, I think, with his hero, and I was a Diamondback, and I loved Harry Larry.
Harry Larry, that's awesome.
Yeah, and we had jumps and posters all over the walls, and Tom Curran was our surfing hero.
Yeah.
And I mean, even then, I believe Jerry Lopez, and when I was with Silt, he was like the sole surfer. But we were inland surfers, so we had to be committed. If you went surfing at that stage, we were 25-30 minute drive.
Yeah.
I mean, once you got there, you were committed. Like, I'm going to surf this slop.
Was there any way of figuring out was there like a surf report or something that you could call?
Funny you should ask. There's they had Surfline was actually just getting started somewhere in there, and I would actually call and check the surf, not really paying attention. I think it was like a 55-cent call or something. Then, like, after the first month of doing that, my parents, my mom and dad, they're like, "What is Surfline on the phone?" And I busted out like $60. I was calling like every weekend, like did the swell change? So, Saturday night, Sunday morning, first thing, I got the same recorded messages on the night before, so I'd spend $1.10, and then they're like, nope, this isn't going to happen anymore. So we would drive Del Diaz Highway, and if you'd see somebody coming in the distance with surfboards on their racks, and I'd have my 4 stacked high on my Dodge Challenger with my Aloha surf racks, we going like, come on, let me know. And then if like everybody in the car, if someone coming by would throw the thumbs up, the whole car would just erupt. Yes! We got surf this morning.
That's
and
amazing.
more than likely, or it'd be like a shock, a sideways. Well, that's all right, or a down would be like,
oh, we're driving all the way there
but we'd be committed. I mean, honestly, I don't think I ever got a downward thumb and didn't continue on. I mean, we'd just go and we'd surf.
Right, because the downward thumb could be just a local going, go back home.
Well, if they're driving back inland where we were, we were the bad guys, like, you're from there.
Yeah.
But we were all, and there's really good surfers like, Corey Werner, Todd Stanley, Matt Goodman, who became a snowboarder and buddy of mine. These were the rippers at our school, and they were just as good as anybody that was coastal.
Sick.
And it was fun.
I think there's something that happens when you are from away from the scene,
right?
Where you have to go there.
Yeah.
You see it when people from Ontario come to BC.
Right.
They'll look at you after and go, "Did you see that run we just did you see what I was doing?
Yeah.
That was the craziest shit I've ever done in my life." So there's an appreciation that doesn't match up with someone who's been here their whole life. Well, I've seen better. It's a pretty good day.
You pick and choose.
Yeah, you pick and choose.
Choose, but in some ways you might get even better. I mean, think about, perfect example is Kelly Slater, Cocoa Beach, little waves that he had to learn how to ride.
Is that in Florida? Like that's
the wave. Yeah.
It's
little
like
waves.
nowhere.
They get waves, obviously, on the right time of the year, but he grew up surfing what he could get. And, look where he went, and look where he's come.
Yeah.
And again, he was local and he was there every day, but the whole point is that you work with what you have. And if you love it, you just go and, hey, this is what we had locally. For me, my dream was to go away, and ultimately we can talk about that later. But, at first, this was the place, and I got let on a lift at a little place called Snow Forest. Most people won't remember it, but that was the first place before Bear Mountain, before Snow Summit, before Snow Valley. Any of these mountains, you'd go up to them with the window and they'd say, "The sledding area is down the street, little boy. You're not allowed here." And we would go to Mountain High was the other one that allowed first. But Snow Forest was a little one lift place that I went up with Carlos. He had his Elite with steel edges and high back bindings, and I had my Slicker with 2 bungee cords and a broken front Fastex strap and moon boots. And I went down. They have one steep little pitch of a run, and Carlos kind of, survived his way down with maybe only putting his hands down like 4 times. And I made 1 or 2 turns at speed down this thing on the Slicker, and the thing I blew out. I was in my booties with the moon boost still attached to the thing, and the thing beating me in the head and my body. I was bruised the next day.
Right, because you had a leash. I
had a boogie board leash.
Yeah,
it was like a 3-foot long leash that I would wrap around like a spiral telephone cord around my leg, and that was my would keep it on my body. But I never thought of it as it was like a ball and chain. I mean, it was like I was bludgeoning myself every time I'd go down. And that was when I really realized I need high back bindings. I need shield edges. And then, it was a whole new world after that. Everybody's heard that moment. And when you get, a powder turn, we got amazing turns on the slicker. But it was when you could really have some control and learn how much you lean back, how much you lean forward, and be able to link your turns with when the magic happens.
Part of what made it so incredibly addicting for me was that you were just dying to see next year's shit because there was such an improvement from one year to the next. I can't even imagine 84 to 85, 85 to 86.
Yeah.
Are there things like boards that stand out that was just like, there was, before this board, and then once this board hit, everything was completely changed?
100%. Yeah. I mean, the Burton Elite was, I thought, leaps and bounds above the slicker because I could actually move the board and turn the board and whatever. But once you started trying to, we weren't carving. We were like throwing the tail out and kind of, arcing it, down the slope. But later on, Burton got wise and figured it out. But at first, those boards were horrible. It was like riding a short ironing board. Literally, I think an ironing board would have been about the same, honestly.
Yeah, probably.
Like a little mini, like hotel room ironing board. That was my board with high backs on it. And, but then, Sims, what I noticed around Southern California and the whole West, like anytime I saw somebody on a Sims, they were carving and they were ripping and they were cool. And I was like, whoa, Sims. It was unbelievable. And I finally saved up. And at that point in my life, I was like, if you're going to get a new board, you got to sell the old board. And so I sold the Burton Elite to some kid, introduced a kid that heard about it. And I bought a Kidwell, one of the first big, thick, I don't even know how many, 8-ply Kidwells. Yeah. And getting on that board was like heaven on earth. I mean, it was flexible. It was forgiving. And I think that's when I really started to like, wow, I can put this thing on edge and carve. And I understood what was going on. And it was just, it was a magical board. And it took me forever to find one. It was hard to find one. I think that I found one finally at Hobie Sports in Oceanside, had one. And I called them and I said, and I was in wherever, Escondido. And I'm like, will you hold it for me? And they said, will you give me a credit card? And I'm all, well, my parents had problems with credit cards and they didn't have any. And I said, but I went and asked my dad for a credit card that wouldn't work, but I just gave him the number. And they held it for me. They said, I'll hold it for you until tomorrow. And I drove to Oceanside. I think I worked at Ralph's grocery stores bagging groceries. And I got up the next morning, drove there, and it was like, oh, this red with the blue stripes Kidwell. And I picked that thing up and went riding the next day. And again, it was
you sleep
magic.
with it in your bed? Like I remember being that stoked on boards. Like, okay,
no, my one corner of my room was my surfboard. Yeah. At that point, it would have been a Bessel. Yep. Or a Linden maybe. And I had the other board in the corner, to each corner of my room. Yeah. On like the,
first thing you see when you wake up, like, oh, look, I can't believe. Sometimes I'd be like, I thought maybe I dreamt I had that board. You know what board it was for me?
No idea.
It was a ketchup and mustard Kelly mystery air that my mom said she would give me $10 per grade level that I got above my, I got like 51% in grade 11 math or something. Right. Went to summer school. For every point I raised my grade, she gave me $10. And, I didn't ace it or anything. So that was like $150 or something. Yeah. And I called Casey down at Big Kahuna Surf Shop in Orillia, Ontario. There's no surf there. Yeah. And they had a used demo stamped in the nose, Craig Kelly from the year before. And I drove all the way down there, 3 hours each way with my mom, bought the board, and just, it's the middle. It was like August. Yeah. I just slept with it in my bed.
Oh, for sure.
I undid every bolt and redid everything. I went and got Loctite from Canadian Tire because the Loctite had, come off the bolts from being put in and out. I wanted it perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I sent my receipt to Burton for the used board because there was an ad they ran that said, for a copy of Craig Kelly's Board with the World, send your receipt from buying this year's Craig Kelly. Didn't say this year's, from buying a Craig Kelly Pro model, and we'll send you the video. So I sent it, and someone called me and said, the ad should say it's not for like a used last year's demo board or whatever.
Right.
And I was like, are you sure? And they said, you know what, we'll send it to you. So they sent me Board with the World, which I watched on repeat. Yeah. Obviously.
Oh, yeah. We rented free Blockbuster, but the surf shops would always have surf videos. And, the ski movies and snowboard.
Copy of the snowboard movies, sure.
And we would rent those and keep them and rewind and rewind and rewind and rewind. Kids have no idea nowadays. Honestly, I think it was Winter Waves, the Burton video, where they hijack, I think Mark Heingartner, and I think it's Andy Coughlin, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's for sure Mark. But they hijack a helicopter as though they can actually fly a helicopter in the Ruby Mountains.
Wow, no way.
Yeah, it's the video. It's like the first little whatever, and I think Jake's there as well. And they go up and they hijack this helicopter in the Ruby Mountains and have these epic turns. And there's one turn that people who know that movie will recognize. I don't even know who it was, but there's a couple turns, and then they hit in this little teardrop chute, and you can see he's got this weightless turn that he comes down, and it's just, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, I love that. I need to go ride big powder. And I thought in my mind, I'm never going to be able to. I looked up to how much is it to pay for a helicopter to go somewhere like Mike Weegley or whatever I found, looked up, and I just looked at it. I'm like, oh my God, I'd have to bag groceries for an entire summer to get one day in or whatever. And I'm
totally
probably not going to ever happen, but we can dream. And
so at this point, pretty early in, see, you're in Southern California, so you actually have access to some stuff. Like in Northern Ontario, nothing is getting through. You got to go to Toronto, and then there's last year's stuff is hanging out in Toronto. You grab that and bring it to Sudbury. But so you actually start getting sponsored pretty early on in the scheme of things. So maybe 5 years into what you do.
5 years in, I didn't get sponsored till I moved to Breckenridge, because that was and after my mom told me to, so I don't know if you want to talk about any of that at all. But
you moved to Breckenridge because your mom was seize the day kind of thing.
Seize the day. Yeah. No, my mom died of cancer when I was 17, and it was, she got cancer when I was 13. And she was told, I didn't know at the time, but she was told that she had a 50-50 chance of living a year of seeing me. And that would have seen me through 8th grade. And her goal was to see me through high school. And she was one of the early chemotherapy pumps where they actually inserted a pump into your body. And then she volunteered to have that trial and do these things. So she was in the hospital a lot. And about that same time, I discovered ISM, International Snowboard Magazine. And I'd go to the hospital and spend time with her. At that age, so many kids just don't want anything to do with their parents. And I was a kid that, I understood the importance of, that she wasn't going to be around forever. And so I would go and hang out, and, she'd get to a point where, she would fade off to sleep or have to get some morphine or whatever. And I'd dig into ISM. And by looking at ISM, about that time was when I think the Worlds first came to Breckenridge, when it had shifted from Soda Springs and Tahoe to Breckenridge. And it was ski the summit. You can ski A-Base in this, Copper Mountain, and only Keystone didn't allow snowboarding. And that was the only big resort that allowed snowboarding. And I just thought, I want to move to Breckenridge. That would be so awesome. And my mom ended up passing away when I was a junior in high school. And one of the last things she said was, if there's anything you want to do in life, do it now, because you just never know about tomorrow. Literally, that's exactly what she said, paraphrased. And to me, she was a workaholic. My parents were workaholics, and they always put off things like vacation till later. We had the coffee can to save extra money that was going to be the Hawaii trip someday kind of thing, but it never got worked out. So I want to see the world. And, I would look at National Geographic with my mom and things like that. That was, she called them our photo vacations, where we'd figure out places to go. And she would always say, you're going to go to these places. Awesome. And, after a year of junior college, after I graduated high school in 87, I just I'm going to Breckenridge. I'm going to go and snowboard my ass off. And I hope I can get good enough. I want to get a photo in ISM magazine, and then I want to use that to, start competing and then get sponsored. And maybe I'll go pro. Maybe I'll see the world on someone else's dime. And that was like the ultimate dream. And, I moved to Breckenridge and started working for a shop, and that ultimately led to exactly that, with a lot of freaking adventures along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Breck at that time was the spot. I can remember it. That's when I started.
Yeah.
So I started in the winter of 88. I'd probably looked at snowboard magazines, 87, 88. When did Transworld start? 86?
87,
87. 87, 88.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Buyer's Guide. Wait, Transworld, the first one is
It's
Dave,
called The First
Dave
Time.
Ock. Yeah.
Dave Achenbach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, on the quarter pipe.
When is the Craig Kelly? I have that issue at home.
I can tell you right now exactly where it is, but my mind is like a 55-year-old mind right now. and I know it's in my mind. I can see it,
That's
but
the first year. That is the first year.
That was the Ken Ock one was.
Dave Ock.
I'm sorry.
Cover. Yep.
Dave Ock.
Was it shot by Ken? No, Guy Motil.
Guy Motil.
Yeah.
There. Yeah. He was Guy and Kevin Kinnear were the admitted kooks who had to go to Breckenridge to both learn about snowboarding and learn how to snowboard. And they called it their crash course in snowboarding.
Yeah.
And that was part of, them. What better place to go and land in the hotbed of snowboarding than to go to the Worlds at Breck. And that was why I went there. I just thought this is the place I can go. I can, try and compete. I did join NASBA. I did the first contest that winter at Wolf Creek.
Sick.
But I also was working. I mean, I had roommates who had parents who gave them an allowance and paid their rent every month. And then I had me and a couple other people, including Matt Goodman, who's a buddy, who people know him as, he was like a writer. He hung out with Palmer and all that whole crew. Zach Bingham.
He was on Morrow,
Andy Hetzel, Brett Johnson, Zach Bingham. They lived around the corner from us.
Holy shit.
Sean Farmer. My introduction to snowboarding in Breckenridge is a pretty cool story.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Maddie said this too, but I knew that there was like snow somewhere on the mountain where I saw somebody come out of town walking down the street with a snowboard when it was October. By the way, I got there in October because I wanted to be there when the first snow hit the ground. I wanted to be there. Everybody else, I got there and nobody would hire me and I didn't have much money. I'm like, we're not going to hire anybody until November, dude. And I'm like, fuck, really? And so, but around early November, they start blowing snow, and people know this from Breck and Summit County, but they called it the whales. And they're big mounds of snow that they would start blowing up on. I think it was peak 9 or peak 8 or peak 9. And it's like the fire roads, driving up the roads to get up there to this patches of snow that I think people had just shoveled out to make a little slick of snow and a big old kicker. And I'll send you some photos from this, but who was up there? But Matt was there, my buddy Matt, Carlos. And this guy shows up with this like white and black striped sweatshirt with dreadlocks, I believe at that point, pretty sure. And it was Sean Farmer. And he just like came out, I'm just going to check it out. And so he didn't even bring his board up. He freaking borrowed someone else's board on this one kicker. It was about, at that point it was like a 4-foot tall kicker, like a big giant mogul, let's say.
Yeah.
And we were all just I was doing suitcase airs and I didn't know how to tweak, couldn't bone out a leg. It was all stinky. And he borrows a couple t-shirts from people, shoves them in on top of his penny loafers. He was wearing penny loafers with no socks. And Sean Farmer takes these and wraps them around his feet and upper so he will be able to snap down a pair of high back bindings. And I would love to say that it was my board that he borrowed, but it was somebody else's board. And he goes to the top of this little thing, a little strip of snow about this wide, mocks it into this freaking little mogul / quarter pipe, and threw a full laid out backflip.
Of course he did.
Fuck. And stuck it. And me and Matt just looked at each other like, what the fuck did we just see? And I thought, dude, if this is the caliber of the local riders, I'm done. I'm never going to get sponsored because I'm not. When I got upside down, it was totally by accident. And anyways, it was
what
a
amazing. Farmer story. The dude has been going longer than anyone.
And that was his second year there. He was on it 1 year earlier, I believe.
And you know what he said about that 1 year earlier? That Arapahoe Basin would allow you to ride the lifts if you had a release binding, which didn't exist. So he made one. He made full release bindings, which that's terrible. Yeah, full release binding. But he made bindings that would eject.
Yeah.
So that he could ride the lifts at A-Base. And I think his estimate was one or two other people like saw what he was doing and said, okay, well, I want to do what you did there.
Right.
Like he made those bindings in Steve Link's garage, I think.
Yeah, Steve Link was up there.
Yeah.
He was making the Summit.
And they were building boards.
Yeah.
They'd build a board at night all drunk, and then they'd go out on one of the passes and try it out.
Yeah.
Like it would still be warm.
Right.
Like he would. So that's so long ago, and he's still frothing and getting after it now.
Yeah.
In Tahoe.
Totally, no, for sure.
Yeah.
And I got to say, he was like everybody said, wild man farmer.
Yeah.
And he was dating at the time Morgan Lafante.
Yeah.
Or I just thought it was Morgan Lafont. And she was really, really awesome. They both had their like dreadlocks. They were cool. One time I was walking home from partying at like, I had a fake ID. I was 20. And I was walking home, and they were towing. They were like doing the towing on like a snowy night, and
skitching. I think we done that.
And they were just having so much fun. And they picked me up and drove home, and I met them, and they were just so nice. And I was a farmer, he was wild and he was crazy and whatever, but he's a sincere, nice dude.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and loved snowboarding, and he was always so stoked. He was always just so fired up to go snowboarding. Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And I was kind of in the background of all this, and it really kind of led to what I eventually did as a writer and an observer, because I was never really like getting in there. Like I'd go to some of the parties, and I remember the night when I think it was Farmer put on a football helmet in their little apartment where he had a room with Zach Bingham and Hetzel, and I'm pretty sure he ran through like the plate glass window in a really snowy night, and he can confirm it. But yeah, with a helmet on, and I remember they were just like and I was just like in the background, just like kind of watching this. And I just I never was really maybe part of the cool kids crew, but I was in the background always watching it. And
you were at things like the Varney Vertical Air Show. You were at these iconic events that I've seen photos from,
and I hated competing too. I was so anxious when I competed. It ruined me. I did okay. I mean, enough to get sponsored, and I got, I think I was always in the top 5, but back then it was like maybe 15 guys in the contest.
Right.
I think the biggest one I ever did, there was like an obstacle course, and I think I won like 4th place out of like 50 people. And it was all like amateurs from all over California. And that was like my biggest win. I had other like second places and stuff. I don't know if I ever took a first place in any of the races, but I definitely got seconds and thirds.
Oh, wow.
But I just loved to, free ride.
Yeah. So how long does that last? The sponsored era of Eric Blehm?
1 year.
So it was a year you're like, I'm going to go for it. Cause you moved back from Breck.
Yeah.
And then I
got sponsored by Look, right when the first year that Bert's yellow board came out, and it was amazing. I mean, I got my first shipment. It was like a trick stick, a yellow board, the yellow freestyle, an overspeed, which was like an oversized, blunt nosed, blunt tailed ironing board, and a Denny Bertrand, asymmetrical board, and then a couple other like little boards, a whole huge box full, a bunch of stuff. The snowboarding is not a crime red sweatshirt, which I still have, and those Look pants, which I coveted.
Amazing.
And that lasted a year, and I was and I worked at Hobie Sports in Oceanside.
That's top of the world right there. Like you're on a team with Steve Graham is rocking those boards.
Yeah,
I think. There was
Dave Cioni and Steve Graham were the two local heroes. Cioni won the California National Amateur.
Yeah.
And that was the same year I was an amateur, basically. So it was, and I think I met him. The first time I met Craig really comes back full circle to today. It was at Snow Summit at the Varney Vertical Air Show.
Wow.
And
that was the year that you were riding as a sponsored rider.
Yeah, I was a sponsored rider.
How cool is that?
And
right where we rode today.
Yeah, I just thought, there was dirt where the actual half pipe was, but it was at the top of a run called the Wall. And at that point in time, they would show us, back into the, back in the corners of the resort. They didn't want a half pipe front and center.
Yeah, no, this was a fringe thing that was going on.
Yeah, they're like, we want to attract the snowboarders. We want to do the contests. But we don't really want all the skiers to pull up at the front and say, dude, this mountain's full of snowboarders.
Yeah.
And so it was at the top up here, and it was a run, and it was just an amazing moment. I met Jason Ford, Keith Wallace, Craig had just gotten on, Damian Sanders was there, Dana Nicholson, all these guys were there. Dan Donnelly was there.
Shit.
It was a weekend when Craig in is it Board with the Wheel World when he ends up, he says he's in Southern California and they got snowed in, the whole mountain shut down, and there was powder everywhere.
Oh yeah,
and
that is Board with the World.
Some shots I showed you earlier of that day was
So
like crusted
sick.
snow. It would not look like Snow Summit.
Yeah.
And Craig, we were all lined up there ready to open the half pipe, and so we were all the local like amateur kids that were frothing for the half pipe, and we all lined up at the top, the roll in, kind of sideways with our board, dunk dunk dunk, and back.
Yeah.
And I was like the third one in back.
Yeah.
Board sideways, like ready to slide in, and all of a sudden somebody rides over the tops of like all 10 of us, everybody that lined up across the top. By the way, Tom Sims was hand shaping the first hit, the last one with a shovel.
That's unbelievable.
And he walks up and he's like, okay, guys, it's open. And that's when somebody slides across all the tops of our boards. And as he goes past us, it's Dana Nicholson. And he says, first thing you got to learn when you go pro is how to snake.
Wow.
And we're just like, what? And
Did he blast something awesome after that, or did he go and eat it?
I mean, he always would go big.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything. He did like a big, it was a front side hit.
Yeah.
And I can't remember but I think he just did like a big old like stiffy. Honestly, I
Sure.
think he did a big front side stiffy.
Sure.
And,
Which is badass.
And Tom Sims walks up and he says, you know what? Guy's kind of a dick. He said, but you got to figure he's always in Damien's shadow.
Yeah.
And I thought Tom Sims was the coolest guy in the world ever
yeah,
after saying that.
Yeah.
And then we're all there, and I looked to the right, and there's Craig Kelly putting his bindings on, and he's sitting there right there on the side of all of us. Had got to the front of the line, but went to the side.
Yeah.
It was all strapped in, kind of had almost swooped in, like nobody. I didn't see him there before. All of a sudden, he was just there.
Yeah.
And he said, he said, yeah, that was kind of dickish. And then he said, but he's right. And then he just stood there for a minute, and like didn't stand up, and he looked at it. You guys gonna drop? And everybody's like, not me. You're
Yeah.
Craig Kelly.
You go ahead, Craig Kelly.
And that was the first words in person that I
Yeah.
saw this guy that I'd only seen in magazines. And
what era
dropping.
Craig Kelly board is that? Like the ketchup mustard?
It was the ketchup mustard.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's the one. I think that same place was where they did the airs over the Snowcat, and they did aired over the Suzuki Samurai. They had parked. I think they had a Samurai
shit.
parked between the big air to like it was like a tabletop.
I remember
sawed in
it.
half.
I remember it. Yeah.
And you had to clear like it was not very far. It was like 7 feet. Like we were all landing flat.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was ridiculous.
But those airs over the Snowcat were insane.
I thought that was there, but I'm not positive on that. But all I remember is Jason Ford was really nice. Jason's still a good friend.
Yeah.
Duck Boy was super chill. Craig didn't talk to him anymore after that moment. But I thought he's kind of funny. Like, yeah, that's dickish, but he's kind of right.
Yeah.
And Tom Sims for saying that about Dana was hilarious.
What a day.
Yeah. And that was the first moment. And then from there, I ended up going back to Breck that same spring, which would have been 90, I think. And then that was when Palmer beat Craig.
At the TDK. That was a big deal.
And and I talk about that in the book. It's a great section in the book, but I blew my shoulder. I hurt my shoulder and I decided I really injured myself, and I realized, you know what? I'm not maybe going to be Craig Kelly. And I also loved to free ride. And I had met a guy on a chairlift that was a travel writer, and he had said he majored in journalism. I thought, you know what? I'm going to get my degree, and I'm going to work for ISM, and I'm going to see the world on someone else's dime. And
Amazing.
I'm going to stay in this world, but I'm going to take this path. And it worked out really well.
So ISM and Transworld overlapped for a year or two.
They overlapped. Yeah. They were like, as Tom Shea would put it, who founded the ISM. I've remained in touch with him and consider him a friend over the years. And he was like my ultimate like mentor. Like he did that. And so was Wiley Asher, who was a writer.
Yeah.
He was like the first paid person to get paid on a staff just to write about snowboarding. And I kind of figured that I was the first person ever to try and get a degree in journalism with the sole reason to work for a snowboarding magazine.
Oh, absolutely.
I thought I was, but then come to find out, I think Jeff Galbraith also got his degree in journalism.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think he knew he was going to be a writer. He may not have known, his goal might not have been snowboarding magazines, but I just found out about him recently. And there were others too. I think, Billy Miller, I think that he was journalism or English maybe. So a lot of people were kind of finding their own path. How can I stay in this world Some
Yes.
people wanted to start companies. Some people wanted to, but then there was this whole other side of creatives that wanted to take photos. Gordon Isham, he basically decided to pick up a camera because he wanted to take photos, and he befriended Craig, and Craig Kelly loved people who were passionate about snowboarding and loved it. And,
Hell yeah.
And
I want to just mention right now, because you've alluded to the book. And when you say the book, we're talking about The Darkest White by Eric Blehm. This is him. Wrote the book of Craig Kelly's life. It starts very young, right? Like it covers his whole life.
It starts at birth and ends shortly after his death, and will take you to the moment of his death.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, Craig died 20 years ago this season, and or last season,
right?
And you know, I know you told the story but about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, you were noticing that, you know, maybe not everybody knew who Craig was, or maybe almost, you know, less people than they should, for sure.
Yeah.
And you got a kind of an internal calling of like, okay, I've always wanted to write this book. The time has not been right to write this book.
Right.
For you personally. But so what changed that? Was it?
I will say it's really interesting, but when I shifted from Transworld and went freelance and started writing books, it was kind of that natural progression for anybody. And like when you listen to the Hatchets talk about their movies, and you listen to, you know, you start at a certain place, and you kind of want to evolve. And at some point, you know, snowboarding and writing about snowboarding became a little bit of a job as well.
Right.
And I always made sure I never wrote about surfing, because surfing was going to be just for me. But snowboarding originally was what, you know, showed me the world, working for Transworld, become the editor of Transworld. That's where I
let's
met
go
Craig.
back. Let's actually go back, because before we get to that, you're, you know, a New York Times bestselling author. You went to school for journalism with the intent to become a writer at ISM.
Yeah.
And you get out of school and you get that job, essentially.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, I was crushed when ISM went under, and I had, you know, being a snowboarder back then, you're going to subscribe to everything. Or for me, you would go into the grocery store, and while your mom or dad or whoever shopped, you'd be camped out at the magazine rack reading whatever magazine covered your world. They were the magazines were the influencers.
Totally.
And magazines were everything. Honestly, to us, if you were into a sport.
Did you read the articles and think, like, I could do this? I could write articles like this.
I got to the point. I also read. I wasn't a skier. I've never skied in my life ever. I have never I started snowboarding, like I said, in I can't remember exactly if it was like the December of '83, but I think it was December of '83.
Yeah.
While I was working for Main Street Sports in Breckenridge, which there was Snowboards of the Rockies, and by the way, who I got introduced, who I learned about the whales for was Brad Reeser.
Oh, sick.
Was, and their family owned Snowboards of the Rockies, and I saw him. He was one of the people I saw in town, and I said, "Hey, you hit a snowboard. Can you show me where the whales were?" And I said, "Oh, by the way, do you have any room for anybody for a job? I need a job."
Sick.
And he was like, we're all booked up. And that's when I went I basically started going to any shop in town that sold snowboards. And one of them was Pat Stanton and Paula Stanton and Main Street Sports. Coolest boss in the world. I can never say enough about them. And they are actually linked to this book as well, 2 decades later. But he was basically, you know, taught me how to tune boards, skis, everything like that. And he always said that I was the best ski salesman there. He called it the Blehm method, because he said you had this he actually said it was like the Force, like you were like Obi-Wan Kenobi when you would do add-on sales. Like someone would come in for sunscreen and to rent skis, and I wowould say, you know, have you thought about buying skis for your family? And all of a sudden the person would say, you know, we have thought about buying skis. And he would just see this, and he just like roll his eyes, like either this is like God's gift to heaven. Like I've never seen anything like it. And I would sell the crap out of everything. Always what people wanted. And one thing Pat always said, have integrity. Don't ever sell something that they don't want and that they don't need, but you can always enhance someone's experience in retail or whatever by, you know, make the suggestion. You know what these people need.
Yeah.
If they're going on the hill and it's snowing and you see they have dark goggles and they could use some Vermilion Bolle lenses, they will thank you when you sell them pink lenses today.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of thing that we would do. And I loved it. And so anyways, we would work split shifts. Either you worked the morning or you had a split shift. So you could snowboard every single day.
Sick.
And one thing Pat said, everybody always wonders he told me this, wonders at the end of the year how many days they got in. And so there was a broom in the shop that was like the sweeping broom. And that became, I claimed it. I said, that's my broom. And he said, make a notch in it every day you go.
Sick.
And so I had my broom, which would be my sweeper, but then I would also make a notch on it. So at the end of the year, I could get to the end of the year and figure out how many days I got in. One of these days I was on a split shift on a chairlift, and there was this guy riding up the chairlift. I remember he was kind of nowadays I have no idea. At the time I thought he was a little bit of an older dude. So he's probably like 35.
35, whatever.
45, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
I don't think he was in his 50s, but 35 to let's say 45. And he rode up the lift with me. I had my season pass, and he started asking me questions. And the kind of questions that you would ask a local or whatever, like, hey, where's the best happy hour? And where can I? And I think I told him, go to Fajitas. It was like this, and everybody will know what that was. But that was a great place to sit around and have beers and eat fajitas with like this creamy cheese sauce on top of either a carne asada or a chopped chicken or whatever. And I gave him all these little hints, and then I said, why all the questions? I think he was asking way more questions than the average tourist.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm a travel writer. I'm here for a newspaper, writing a story for this newspaper. And in my mind, I remember it was definitely Texas, and from Texas. And at that point, Texans were like the biggest tourist drive for Breckenridge. I learned later. Like,
what?
Texans love to go to Summit County in Colorado and ski. And he said, yeah, they basically send me here, my newspaper, local newspaper, and they set me up in the Beaver Run Lodge, which was like the schwanky lodge at the bottom of the lift.
Sick.
Which we would sneak into and use their jacuzzi all the time. Nice. And I get a free lift ticket and I ski for a week, and then I write a story about it.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I literally said, what a scam. I said, I want to go to college someday. What did you major in? And he's all, journalism. And that moment, the light bulb went off like, huh. Well, as it happens, a year later, I had my year of competing and everything like that. And I ended up just realizing that, gosh, maybe that is something. So that was at the point when I started looking at the stories and reading them in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I loved Powder Magazine, because it was a skier magazine, but it was crazy. It was an adventure magazine.
You never skied ever in your life, but Powder Magazine, just because the mountain vibe, the snow, and the travel,
and they had had good writers, and great writers actually, and adventure.
My cousin Stephen Metcalf, a snowboarder, wrote for Powder Magazine. He was the editor of Powder Magazine around when you were at Transworld, maybe a little later.
Right.
Yeah, mid-90s.
So, long story short, that following season, at the end of the season when I was sponsored, I came back out to Breckenridge. I watched Sean Palmer beat Craig at the TDK. And
live, you saw that happen?
Yeah, in the crowd.
Oh, wow.
I was in the crowd watching those guys. And then a few days later, I was just free riding, and believe it or not, I wasn't going to get deep into all these stories. There's so many little freaking, it sounds like there's no possible way that this could be true, the way it all links together. But a few days later, I came back to the pipe, and who do I see up there? But a whole bunch of the pros are still in town, and they're sessioning, including Craig.
Yep.
Jacoby was there. Jason Ford was there.
Sick.
I think Brushy was there. Mike Ranquit was there.
Rad.
And they were filming for a snowboard movie that was going to be called 20 Tricks.
I know
the very first one.
Yeah.
And so I sat there and first thing I did, I came up, I'm like, oh, I'm sponsored, and I had my I had on like a hot pink and with turquoise snowflakes that I thought was cool because I got it from Quicksilver Europe.
Rad.
It was rad with my yellow look pants.
Unreal.
and my, at that point, I think I was riding the yellow freestyle, the Burt Lamar freestyle, funky dong tip nose, and squared off weird, whatever. And I took my board off and just watched for a while and watched them ride, and they were filming this thing. And I got the guts to walk up to Craig. This was when I first spoke to Craig, and I walked up to him and I said, hey, he was at the bottom. They'd gotten to the left side and he was starting to walk back up. And I just said, hey, Craig Kelly. Like, yeah, you're Craig Kelly. Craig Kelly. I said, congratulations. And he's all, I didn't win, dude. Cause he took second. And he was kind of but he was cool enough because I didn't win. And I'm all, dude, top 3. I said, I'm competing now. And I said, I get so nervous. And it's just the competing is, I get so nervous. How do you overcome that? And he said, he was very heart to heart. He kind of said, I get really nervous when I compete too.
Sick.
And we were there. And then frickin' Rankwit walks by. And he is at that point, he was like in a Quimbola man, I think, like earth tones, or it was the beginning of grunge.
Yeah, GNS.
It was the beginning of grunge, basically.
Right,
baggy, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm wearing my yellow pants with this sweater. Like, it's actually a mock tee with a zipper up here. And I look, and as he walks by us, he says, nice sweater. Fucking Rankwit. And I thought 2 things instantaneously. That's Mike Rankwit. And then I thought, fuck, I just got dissed by Mike Rankwit. And Craig kicked snow at him and said, dick.
Wow.
And he kept walking up the side and he just said, hey, he said, you know what? He said, if I were you, and if I didn't have to be here right now, I'd be free riding.
Yeah.
And it was like an eye opener. That was all Craig said.
That's incredible.
If I didn't have to be here right now, I'd be free riding. And so I'm kind of embarrassed that I've been sitting here for 25 minutes on the side of this run, just watching, like, being a fanboy.
Yeah.
And so I went free riding for the rest of that day.
That's pretty sick.
And I came back at the end of the day, and the place was empty. The pipe had been kind of cut up, and it was spring, and so it was icy and hard. And I was trying to do this stupid trick that I envisioned. I thought I could go up front side and do a stiffy, because I could do really cool, get the stiffy above me, but I thought I could somehow rotate around and land fakie front side,
yeah,
fakie, like a stiffy to fakie, which I saw a few people do. Yeah. And I thought, I'm going to do that. And so I had nice speed and I hit a couple hits and I'm like, okay, I'm feeling this. And then I went for one of those. And as I came around, I just hooked the top and I wrenched my shoulder out. And I was basically just like in the flat bottom with my shoulder dislocated.
Oh God.
And injured myself really bad. And so that was basically the end. I came home, I had to have surgery and all these things.
Oh shit.
And that's when I realized, you know what? I'm going to go get my degree in journalism.
And so you apply.
I applied, got in.
You went to University of Colorado?
No, I went San Diego State University.
San Diego State.
I was still San Diego.
Yeah.
And ultimately got back to Transworld and that was, became.
So while you're doing school, did you get hired at Transworld as an intern or something?
Ultimately, I was like a year shy. I would go snowboarding. I went to my first international travel. I went to New Zealand and Australia to snowboard in the summer because I couldn't during the winter because of school.
Yep.
And worked. I was a ski tech and a salesman at a sporting goods store and paid my way through college and got the job at Transworld ultimately as an intern at first and then got an assignment. And there was such a turnover. What was your first assignment? My first assignment was to interview Neil Drake.
Sick.
Who was a Sims writer, and him and like Sean Snoke was his name.
I remember Snoke.
And a few other like local rippers. And I always thought that Neil would be the one that would go the farthest because he had such a good head on his shoulders.
What a crazy coincidence! I asked Corey Octoon, who is hiding out in the bushes up here in Big Bear Lake, and I think he said Neil Drake.
Yeah, he very well could. I think his dad was a judge, but I went to interview him. It was like summertime when I got the assignment from Lee Crane. Yeah, and he said, and at that point I had got an article published in Powder. Yeah, about an avalanche of all things. Yeah, another like newspaper article. And I said, he said, we could use a border patrol. They called the checkouts. Neil Drake, can you do it? And I'm all, yeah, Transworld, I'm going to do it. I'd love to do that. And, did it and brought it back to him, delivered it to him, printed out with a floppy disk in person. And Lee walked to the front of Transworld, the office, and right in the same exact booth where, Salema Masakela ended up being I can't remember what he was at very first, but I'm pretty sure he just answered the phone at the front desk. And he wasn't there at that point, but saw Lee and he said, so this is the first story. This is a big deal. And he knew. He was a writer, Lee Crane, he knows his stuff. He started the Mammoth Times newspaper before he got hired for Transworld.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he definitely had a writing background. I don't think he was a journalism major. Maybe he was, but he definitely was a business guy too. And he looks at the story and he said, I'm going to give it the first sentence test. And I'm like, oh shit. And, the first sentence of the book the story about Neil Drake was, I saw him, he was working on the docks at renting boats. And as I walked up to him, I'm like, hey, Neil, it's Eric. And he knew me because we had competed in the same group. He was a junior when I was competing.
Cool.
And he's all, how's it going? And the first thing out of his mouth was, almost caught a beaver this morning. and I thought it was so funny at the moment that I just thought, that's the first sentence of the story. And that was the first sentence, almost caught a beaver this morning. And Lee he read that sentence. He said, I don't even need to read the rest of it. We're definitely going to run this.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that was the first story published by Transworld it was assigned in 1992, and it was published in the winter of 93. And from there, it led to internships and people getting. There was such a turnover. Lee left, and then Jamie Meiselman was assigned to become the managing editor.
Yep.
And then he left to get into he does Solite boots right now, by the way. Those they're the best surf booties in the world right now. But he went to he did generics, and for a while, he started
blacks and generics.
He started
really?
that. He was like a business guy, but an engineer's mind.
I thought that was European.
It was European, but he took over here. He was doing the States side of that.
Yeah, kind of like Nitro USA, where it's look, we're going to Americanize your shit and we're going to blow it up.
Exactly.
And it did well for 2 seasons or something.
Yeah. I rode one of the boards. My roommate Pete McAfee was one of their first reps.
We sold a lot of their boots. Those Blacks boots
they were light.
Were
they
so
were the first
light.
Really lightweight boots.
Yeah. How interesting that those lightweight boots in snowboarding, and now he's the lightweight booty guy in surf.
Yeah.
That's sick.
Yeah. He was really good and really warm booties. So anyways, I'm giving my plugs to all my friends.
Yeah, you need to.
It's weird when you come back in this.
It's dope.
It's weird how so many people, where they go with where snowboarding took them. And all of us, every single person, just like Mike Hatchett said, we all got into this. I did it so I could keep snowboarding and to see the world on someone else's dime, and to, maybe someday I'll ride a fucking helicopter.
Right.
And ultimately was able to get that job where I could basically assign myself, okay, I'm going to assign myself these stories. And every single time it was at least 2 catboarding trips, at least 2 heli trips. And then I love the backcountry. So they're always backcountry trips. And we would just, you would create the adventure that you wanted, and you would do it. And
what a dream.
Yeah. I think my first interviews ever were Shannon Dunn.
Sick.
I got to Jeremy Jones, Big Mountain Jeremy Jones' first interview.
Yep. His first Transworld interview.
Yep. I interviewed Sean White's first Transworld interview.
Wow. Heavy hitters.
And I hung out with the King of the Hill.
It's not Matt Goodwill.
Matt Goodwill. Thank you. Fuck. I'm sorry, Matt. I did this story, and I got to interview him, and I immediately said, I'm going to call this The King and I.
Oh, I love it.
So we went and
That's
did a story
sick.
called The King and I. And again, Brian Savard, he was such a thinker. He was so smart and very a little bit cerebral, like Craig was, honestly.
I could see that.
And who other, just these. Oh, and I did Brian Iguchi's first interview.
Fuck, look at that.
So those were the people that I got to introduce to the world by the written word, though their photos always, as the photo department would say, snowboarders don't read. They just look at the photos.
Yeah, I don't know if I read much. I remember reading Jim Rippey's interview where he said something about, I like to pet my cat where his balls used to be. It was such a bizarre interview. I just remember reading it and being like, I don't know what to think about this
Jamie
guy.
Meiselman assigned a big New York sports writer to write that story. He wasn't like a snowboarder. All the rest of it, we were just snowboarders. I had a degree in journalism, and I was a snowboarder. Yeah. And I'd lived in Breckenridge, so I was I had my cred, supposedly.
Yes.
But then there were people who really knew how to write, and we all kind of figured it out along the way.
Yeah.
But we, you always have to have words to have a story, and that was what made it such a fun thing. Plus, we had to just put these magazines together right when everything was blowing up.
Okay, so I've got a Patreon question that I'm going to ask right now. All right, so Stephen Maddox, thank you for being our Patreon supporter. Here's a question for Blehm. Will the Transworld archives ever be available in PDF as an online archive? That would be fucking rad.
Kind of the wrong person to ask, but I can kind of probably fill in some of the gaps.
Yeah.
It should be.
Yeah.
And I know that none of it will be lost. It's there. I'll have to talk to to some of the guys, really, Mark Hostetter and Adam Cousins, who were there, still there at the very, end when Transworld kind of went away, and Nick Hamilton. And I would think somebody has suggested it's quite a massive job to do it. And the scary thing is also, if you're going to scan them and everything, you kind of have to cut the magazines. I've got certain issues that I've thought of doing the same thing, but I covet them so much that I can't imagine cutting it to get rid of that curve in the page to actually scan it on a flatbed scanner or a photograph.
So if some listener out there has a stack of like a complete set of Transworlds that they want to sacrifice to the cause.
I plan to do my own articles, which kind of cover a certain area. I love the golden age, like the early years. And then from, once it gets to the point where everybody has phones and everything, it gets a very different style of documentation.
Yes.
But I will say that, I will get behind it and maybe even encourage it. And maybe by the time The Darkest White comes out in February, I'll have an answer for you that you could say. But I will say that I know it's been talked about. It just hasn't been done yet.
Right.
And
cool.
And it really should be.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's really important. I think it's
because it's not only the stories and the covers, it's the advertisements. It's all part of the journey.
It's everything.
It tells history. I mean, I can tell you right now, after spending 5 years researching this, the snowboarding magazines are they're by default, they are the history books of the sport.
Right.
And the problem is that most of those historians never put dates on things. So you have to dig deeper and deeper and deeper to figure things out. But you still at least have the basic idea. If it's in this year's issue, it happened the winter before.
Right.
So everything is a year later.
Misstated, but
all this, it's like the pros would live in two different worlds. They'd be riding the current gear, but the people in the magazines are seeing last year's stuff. So they're always like kind of a year ahead, about halfway through the year, they're writing next year's stuff, getting photos for the following year's photos.
Right.
And so they're like kind of living in two different worlds all the time. And the photographers are careful of that. Hey, are you riding the right gear? Is this what we want for next year? You could get an epic photo of somebody, but they're riding last year's board. We don't want that on the cover.
Right. Right. Which that's great that we're talking about this because
but now it's different. I think
for a person, I think it's the same and it's evolved from there. That's just my guess. But it's like, Kevin Kinnear was the original editor of Transworld magazine.
Right. He was the founding editor. And his idea, from what my standpoint looks like, it sounds like he had seen the progression of surf mags from people who were journalistically inclined and also could pick up a camera, snap a shot, and that were just wanting to document what was going on now. Right.
And at that time, the guy might be on a 12-year-old board. He might be on, that might be a part of what the article is being written about.
Yeah.
Whereas by the time snowboarding comes along, that first year, you could probably sneak a photo in on an old board if it was a really good photo.
Right.
But, once the magazine starts making money from advertisers, you're going to want to showcase next year's gear, or you want to have the photos from last year of the guys on the current year stuff.
Right.
So that you can, so it's just some kid who rips that's got a 3-year-old board is just exempt from the magazine pages because, I'm sorry, you're on the wrong gear. You just are.
Yeah.
Right.
The buyer, the first issue of the year is always the buyer's guide, and it introduces everybody, every kid, every person out there in the world is going to see the gear. And if you can see the riders and the photos in the magazine matching that gear, and then matching the photographs in the advertising, it's not a total killer. Like if it's a cliff shot where you don't really see the gear and it's epic, they would definitely run it. If it's a POW shot and whatever, but anything like in the pipe or anything like that where you're seeing the graphics on the board, or even honestly, there's outerwear as well. Outerwear could go from whatever it is. Bonfire has this whole line that is like earth tones, and all of a sudden they decide we're going to go kind of more crisp this year, and they're like we're not going to submit any of those photos. I don't care how big that air is.
Right.
And, Brad Stewart's like, sorry, because he's a snowboarder and he knows the sport and he knows the air and he knows it's awesome and he knows it's painful, but he's also a businessman and a marketeer. And he's going to say, hey, sorry, don't turn that photo in.
Unreal. I want to talk about, I think, the most famous article that you wrote, or the most popular, which would be The Chameleon. That's in my opinion. And I remember it being kind of groundbreaking because it was probably the end of that era of us thumbing our noses at ski resorts and skiers and the old school mentality of learning how to ski, this technique that had to happen. Yeah. And the fact that there was this kind of rivalry back and forth. And it probably coincides with Bald Face and some backcountry lodges starting up where they're catering to snowboarding. Right. But who came up with the idea for the Chameleon? And could you explain who the
Chameleon was? Yeah. It was definitely my brainchild. I thought of it, and it was from all those years of honestly being shunned at these resorts that would not allow snowboarding, and knowing at a certain level, once I got to steel edges and high back bindings, I'm sorry, we can get down the hill as good as any other beginner skier. Yeah. And granted, there was a youth attitude and whatnot, but we're kids. There's kids that are skiers as well, and I personally have been hit by skiers more time ever than a snowboarder. So all that aside, at that point, this would have been 94 when I first started with with Transworld Snowboarding magazine as an editor. I just pitched the idea to the whole group. There's only a few skiers that don't allow snowboarding anymore. And that same year, Nitro had introduced the Nitro Tour, which was like the first that I saw production model split board. Yep. And I've never skied in my life. But I thought, you know what? I am going to go. And the one mountain I really wanted to ride that I'd never been able to was Alta. Because everybody thinks of Alta, powder, deep, epic. It was kind of like the Utah version of A Basin on steroids, and great snow. And we couldn't ride there. Yeah. And so I thought, I am going to, I want to go and poach these mountains. I want to go and buy a lift ticket legitimately. I want to ride the chairlift as a skier at the split board and ski mode. I want to go to the top. I want to go into the side of the run or somewhere on top of the most crowded run on that mountain. And I'm going to ride right down the center amongst all these skiers to prove. And at that point, it was like tongue in cheek to prove that, wow, we can actually get along. In fact, we can even ride down a run without cussing anybody out or hitting anybody. Yeah. And I thought it would be really fun. And then I thought the angle for it, which would be kind of fun, would be what if I made it like a secret agent? What if it was a secret agent that did this? And that might have been inspired a little bit from Double O Zabo. And that whole area, like that was cool. But I was always a huge 007 fan. Like I wanted to be. I got recruited by the Secret Service out of high school. Actually, I decided not to go that direction, but I was considering being Secret Service as a career at one point.
Holy fucking shit!
Yeah, it was funny. It was really
that's
cool.
Insane.
It was, yeah, I look back and I'm like, wow, how my world would have changed had I done that. Yeah, but I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't. I'm happy where we went with my life and family and everything. But in fact, one of the reasons I didn't is because the agent that I was working with, and he kind of said, if it's really hard on family, do you feel like you want to have a family someday? And I said, yeah, I definitely want to have a family someday. And he said, that could be the reason not to. So, but what I did get to do was vicariously become a secret agent by creating this spy that I called the Chameleon. Yeah. And the Chameleon, of course, is it a reptile? Yeah, it's a reptile. I want to make sure I'm not messing up. Yeah. With what are the other that could
geckos or something?
Yeah. Some of them are a different whatever that is. I'm not a science
genus.
Thank you.
Sure.
But the chameleon blends in with its environment. Yeah. And can not be seen. And I thought
that's so smart.
And so my idea was to have a photographer follow me around, and I was going to ride as long as I could until the ski patrol tackled me and pulled me off the mountain.
How many runs did you get at Alta?
I got first of all, I went and I talked to the guys at Salty Peaks, Drew Hicken and Dennis Nazari. Both went with me.
Crazy.
Yep. And I said, hey, I called them. I said, hey, have you heard of it? And they said, yeah, we have split boards. And I got a photographer named John Bing, who he passed away tragically from some cancer, not too long ago, but he was an early Colorado photographer that shot like Adam Merriman and those guys. So he was really cool, and he was a skier, and he came along and he basically shot these things and I had a micro cassette recorder, and I went to Alta, and then I went to Keystone, and then I went to Aspen Mountain, and I nailed all three of them back to back that first year, and it was such a success. I called it Live and Let Ride. And they were always like a little 007 twinge to the story. The next year I did Irony in the Wasatch, and I went to Park City.
Yeah.
And it was absolute bullshit because I got kicked out there, and I was talking to the marketing inside saying, hey, I want to get my refund. They weren't going to refund the money because they said you should have known that you don't allow snowboarding. I'm like, well, you just kicked me off the mountain. I would like my money back. Yeah. And I went in and talked to the guy. They ended up giving me my money back. All this on microcassette. And then I'm talking to him, and I find out, I'm like, wait a minute, you guys are bidding for the Olympic events, like the following year or whatever, for the Olympics. And
2002 or whatever it was.
Yeah, it was news. We had learned about it, and I knew this, so I kind of it was one of those moments where I wanted to have a gotcha. Yeah. And I'm all, does it make sense to you that you won't let me on the hill today, but you're bidding for the Olympic snowboarding events in a couple of years? And I remember he was kind of wise, cool to the whole thing, and he said, yeah, doesn't make sense at all.
Right.
And then the following year I did Taos, New Mexico, the whole free Taos thing. And Mark Gallup ended up shooting that one for me. And I did that one totally solo. I went the Utah one. I always try to hook up with some locals, and there was this guy, I forgot his name, but his nickname was the Gingerbread Man. And he was a split boarder that would actually split board on the runs as well.
Oh, wow.
So there were other people doing this.
Yep.
And that just became and honestly, that was in 1995. That would have been my board at Island Lake Lodge when I was taking my first level 1 avalanche course to do a story called 7 Days at Avalanche Boot Camp, Getting Schooled, was what we called it. And Craig was a shareholder at Island Lake, and he shadowed the whole course. Wasn't in it, but we traded books for the first time then. And he saw my split board in the room, and that's when he first saw, as far as I know, a split board. And
wow.
He wanted to see it, and he looked at it. And I'm not going to tell you, I tell the whole story in the book, but it's kind of funny. His reaction to his first look at the Nitro Tour split board was pretty funny and prophetic, really.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Craig for a second, because, I mean, the listeners of this show know who Craig Heli is.
Yeah.
Most of them. Now, if you are a listener who doesn't know who Craig Heli is, one of the things I remember about the prologue of your book is that it really has a succinct part that if you've because you had to write this for everyone in the world.
Yeah.
I've known about Craig Heli since I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But for someone who doesn't know about Craig Heli, there's a part of the book, maybe you could read it, that introduces.
Read it right here?
Could you do that?
Let me find it. Let me put my glasses on so I can see.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Let me see if the book starts really at the 2003 Extreme X Games in Aspen, and I wanted to put people in the moment of that period of time so they would understand. And that was actually before Shaun White had been a Olympian. And he had, people definitely knew he was ripping.
Yeah.
But he wore a Craig Heli is my co-pilot sticker on his bib on his winning run for the Super Pipe. And
in 2003, a few weeks after Craig passed.
Yeah, it was like literally like 2 weeks later.
Oof.
And he was, it was, to me, I kind of describe it as he was kind of like the silent rider. Like people who understood what that meant, what that Craig Heli pilot was like, that was the North Star pointing the way. And, when I got into it, I ended up in the book, I travel back to where Craig was killed. It was kind of like, it took me 15, 16 years to get to the point where where I finally got to the spot so I could kind of pay homage to him and a pilgrimage. And when he had first gotten to this place, one of the skier went with him who I interviewed, he had said the first thing he said when they landed at this place in Selkirk Mountain Experience was, welcome to paradise. And so when Craig landed there on January 18th, 2003, a skier he had flown in with said simply, welcome to paradise. 16 years later, when I landed at the same spot, I wasn't so sure. This was, after all, the paradise that killed Craig Kelly, who, let's be clear, hadn't even seemed mortal. He was a superhero, born from a blizzard on a sleeping volcano. He levitated down mountains, raced avalanches, aired cliffs, and landed on the covers of magazines. If gods walked the earth, said photographer Gordon Isham, Craig was one of them. That's not hyperbole. We all believed it, says fellow pro writer Jason Ford, right up to the moment when he heard of the impossible news of his death.
That's so. You need to read your own book. Can you do? Can you do the reading for your own book? This is God. Joe Rogan always tells people you got to read your own book.
You know what? If I was Matthew McConaughey and I was reading Green Lights, which anybody's read, it's great, it's amazing. If I was Matthew McConaughey, maybe I would read my own book.
Your voice is great for it. Holy shit!
We got a professional to do it.
Yeah, reach out if you're a listener. You want to hear the book read by Eric Blehm. We'll put together a big protest to make sure that you do it.
The cool thing though is that Gordon Isham, who was he wasn't like one of the big super well-known photographers, but he worked with Craig, and Craig loved to work with him. He was a writer who got into photography because Craig knew that how much he loved to ride. And that's a photo from Gordon Isham of Craig in the Cascades on the cover of the book. And so it's a pretty cool full circle journey for him. And when I didn't know I was going to use that photo, when I used that quote, when I first started talking to Gordon and interviewing him as one of more than 100 people I interviewed for this book. Yeah. And then he's on the cover, and I'll just he won't mind saying he cried when I told him that his photo is the cover of the book.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
When I started the FNRad podcast 9 years ago, I had the foresight to pin the conversations to Craig Kelly, the greatest to ever do it. So I would call people and I would say, I'm doing a podcast, and people would go, what the hell is that? And I'd say, like a radio show for the internet. And you knew Craig. Would you mind telling a couple Craig stories and maybe your own story of snowboarding? So like the first few seasons were really focused around what it was like to know Craig. The atmosphere in those conversations was very somber and very, like, such a great loss.
A reverence.
Yeah, a reverence for sure. Oh, you had so-and-so talk about Craig? Yeah, I'd like to talk about Craig. Have you noticed in yourself or in the industry a shift towards a little bit more like openness about talking about, Craig's playful side, Elmer, the jokester, or, some people would have beef with him or whatever that would never have said something in 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
Have you, do you find you had access to a bit more of the full story of Craig?
Oh, for sure. And I will say, time opens doors. Mm-hmm. It's anything from the healing to the, it shifts from a person to a legend, and it's easier to talk about almost.
Yeah.
But no, it's so hard in a book. Like, my goal with this was to make sure that Craig is not forgotten, because
right.
I can't remember if we talked about it yet, but at some point I realized that, Craig, the current generation of snowboarders, a lot of them don't know who Craig was. And I have explained to people who don't know who Craig was, or older generations, whatever. I've said, for us, when someone says, I've never heard of Craig Kelly, it would be like a basketball fan saying, I've never heard of Michael Jordan.
Right.
Who's Michael Jordan? Now, It's a much smaller world. I mean, basketball was so huge, and so when it was just building up, it wasn't a big time recognized sport, and the most watched sport on the Olympics, for God's sake, now.
Right.
Back then. But for us, who had that in our hearts, and that was, that era was very dear to our hearts. And I'll say once again, for all different reasons, snowboarding gave so many people a path in life, not necessarily as a snowboarder, right, but as a marketing, as as a writer, they could find something that they were good at that could allow them to keep snowboarding. And I'm getting a little choked up.
Yeah, man.
Because it really did. It gave a lot of us a purpose, who maybe, we were a little bit of the, can't believe this, but it gave us a way to live life that, to live life on the way. My mom and dad, again, they were workaholics. And, something I always want to do was, you work your whole life and then you retire and and you're old and you've never done anything. Let's try and do something where we can live life along the way. And that was really my journey. And, seeing Craig, that he did that, and the way he was such an inspiration and a strong role model. But then he could still hang with everybody. I mean, Craig could hang out with like the Euro racers. You cov.
Yeah.
Or he would hang out with the fucking biggest smartass Mike Rankwit Palmer and get respect from every one of them.
Yes.
And at the same time, bought houses, set up his future, ultimately had a child, and slowed down. The guy is such an inspiration, and I just felt it's important that the world gets to know him. And when I was in a chairlift line, and the way this whole thing started, we started talking about it earlier, but I was at a chairlift line, and I had my Craig Kelly as my co-pilot sticker on the end of my board in 2018, 15 years after he'd passed away. And this kid who looked like a kid who should have known, looked at my sticker and he said, "Who's Craig Kelly?" And I was floored. I was like, it was like someone saying on a basketball court, "Who's Michael Jordan?" Like, do you have amnesia?
Right.
Right. Were you on this planet? And then I realized a lot of these people weren't on this planet. They're being born and they were missing out on this. And so that really was what caused me to call, actually I wrote Gillian, and
That's
asked her,
Craig's sister
Gillian,
Yep.
And asked her if she thought it would be okay. Is it a time to do this? And I knew Craig had once upon a time wanted to write a book himself. When I was with him in Iran, we had a whole story. There's other little stupid stories, awesome stories that, I knew he wanted to do this. From there, I went to John Buffrey, who was his mentor in backcountry.
Yeah.
And I knew that Craig was training to become a guide. And I thought, is it time? And he said, yeah, and you're the one to do it. And I think I will do everything I can to help. And then from there, I went to Pat, his dad, and Savina, and ultimately had dinner with Olivia and Savina. And they were very much like, this is, we want you to do this. Craig believed in meritocracy, whatever, capitalism, whatever you want to say. This is your art. This is your business. This is your work. And I want you to do it. And I don't want anything for it. Like they said they wanted Craig's legacy. And these are people some are quite private people. Savina
private.
would much rather be private. And she, I think, was very brave of her to set aside some of her privacy just to help Craig's legacy live on. Olivia as well. Ultimately, Craig's mom as well. His brother, Brian. And then just dozens and dozens of people. They gave me access to all of his notes, his Avalanche record books, all of his, so many things that allowed me to piece it together. And,
I want to interject that if you've never heard of Craig Kelly before and you pick up this book, by the end, you're like a Craig Kelly fan. But if you're a Craig Kelly fan like I am, and I thought I knew a lot about him, every step along the way, I'm going, oh my God, no way.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's some stuff in there that I don't want to spoil it. You need to buy the book, read the book. That is like, it'll change your mind about, like, sometimes you might think, oh, that guy was in the right place at the right time, or he was lucky or whatever. When you're looking at, say, a Shaun White or a Craig, like,
yeah.
And then you hear these things that they did on their own, no cameras.
Yeah.
The incentive was just for the feeling of snowboarding.
Yeah.
And then you actually, after reading this book, I actually had a felt sensation of like, holy shit, Craig Kelly is way more multi-dimensional than the idea I had told myself about this guy. It's really through and through, start to finish. You're just cracking open these little nuggets. And I wonder, obviously you must have spent years and years and years on this book and talked to so many people and got so many stories.
5 years.
There's got to be stories that you wanted to keep in this book that you just didn't have room for.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's painful. They call it in journalism killing your babies. Like literally.
Yeah.
When you have to cut things that you might love. And at the end of the day, it was very much I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to explain people who Craig became. So many people are like, I know he was this guy, but what made him this guy?
Right.
So I wanted to go deep into his childhood a little bit.
It's cool.
And what, to learn some of that. But then I wanted to also show how much of a freaking dedicated, badass training beast he was.
Yeah.
And to give some examples of that and things that, that would show people how he became who he became. And at the end of the day, I will just say that the book length that we wanted to shoot for was like between 90 and 100,000 words, which for a book reader, I don't even know what it comes to in pages, but it's like maybe I don't know.
It's 180 pages or 240
Oh no, it's like
pages
how much is this one? This is
327.
Okay, this is 327 pages. So they were thinking maybe like a 275 page book, maybe, which is a little bit tighter. It's kind of, let's look like an Into the Wild versus John Cracker Into the Wild, book, not too long, versus a much bigger book. Anyways, I ended up turning in 180,000, basically double the 90,000 minimum that they wanted,
Yeah.
and that was really spelling out a lot of cool things that I realized some of it was cool for me and for the snowboarders, but maybe not for the mainstream. And then I started looking at it and I'm realizing some of these are epic stories. They're great, but people can find them. They're online. You can find different stories, a lot about his sense of humor, for instance. Like I wanted to get all these different things, the fact that he was a trickster and he was a prankster. And I just, ultimately I had to kind of pick and choose. Hey, the end of this book, nobody really knew what Craig went through to become a guide, the training just to be accepted.
It's insane.
And it's kind of like there's that, you could have given that montage of just like, boom, 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 this is Rocky hitting meat, doing whatever. And then all of a sudden he's like in the ring. But I thought you need more than that, right?
Yeah.
You need to see what he went through. And I really wanted to give readers both the current the generation who knows Craig Kelly and the general reader, like a sense of what it takes for him. And in another sense, to understand what mountain guides do to become a mountain guide and have someone else's life in their hands, and understand how great Craig would have been in that. So I ultimately had to cut a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And it was painful to cut it, and I hope to use bits and pieces of it in like articles that I can use. But the things that I chose to keep in, and I will own it, and people will look in there and say, how did he not put this in?
Right.
But at the end of the day, I will say, one, you write your own Craig Kelly book, and two, everything kind of, it's all working towards this end that where of what he ended up wanting to become at the end of his life. So everything kind of leads to the next thing, and it all kind of links together. And at the end of the day, yeah, are there going to be regrets? Any author will have regrets about what they didn't put in the book.
Right.
But I'm owning what's in there, and I'm proud of it. It's going to open up the world to people who can then go and, with the internet, find out more. The movies, everything.
Right.
But
it's masterfully written. Like I read it and was, because I'd read your other book first, just while I was waiting for the manuscript. And
which book? Which one?
What was the one that I
Fearless
with
Adam Brown.
With Adam Brown. Oh, what a story! Holy shit! So I'm reading that. So I'd already gotten your cadence. I understood, like kind of like a Stephen King. You know how that book is going to read. If you like reading Stephen King books, his next book comes out, you're like, I can't wait.
Right.
So I didn't realize until I started reading The Darkest White. Ooh, I really like the way that you tell stories. You get.
It's journalistic at the end of the day.
Yeah, but it's
I try it's to pull a narrative story, more of a novel style story, into a narrative nonfiction it's a challenge because you want to stick to the facts.
Right.
You don't want to interject yourself too much at all.
Right.
You can once you're in the story.
And I even asked you today on the way to the mountain, like, well, how the hell do you, or maybe it was yesterday, how the hell can you say, well, then this happened? Like, you weren't there. But then you're like, dude, for like, talk about that Craig Kelly versus Sean Palmer contest.
Yeah.
It's not just first person. You talked to several people about that.
Yeah.
About that, those few paragraphs in the book, right?
It was that's one of my most proud moments as far as recreating a snowboarding moment.
Yes.
And to do that, I wanted to understand what Palmer was thinking when he was at the top watching Craig have his last run.
Yep.
I wanted to understand what Craig was thinking. How do I do that? Craig's not with us. Well, Jacques Rousseau was kind enough to give me a lot of raw footage from those movies that he did, plus the actual movie itself, where he says a little bit of what he was thinking as he was going in and saying, "Hey, this is your last chance," whatever. I could quote from that.
Palmer had great runs, but I had better ones. Yeah, it's like
and
amazing.
On top of that, luckily, VHS tape found in a box in Brian Kelly's house that had the tape that his Aunt Trudy and his dad Pat were there videoing. So I got to hear what the crowd's reactions were on the spot, what Lee Crane did as he announced it, what he asked Palmer afterwards, and what Palmer said. So those 4 things. And then on top of that, I was there and I was in the crowd.
Yeah.
And so 5 different angles. Oh, and Bud Fawcett, who was photographing from the rollout. So 6 people, 6 perspectives all went together to make this, 5 paragraphs in the book, 4 paragraphs, probably a month and a half of research to get those 4 or 5 paragraphs.
It's unbelievable.
But from different. And so, again, it's,
that's what makes it such a fascinating read.
Yeah. And then talking to Palmer later and saying, not only did I hear what he said at the moment, but what he thought about it later. And Palmer, I mean, I don't think you throw that too many compliments. And he was like, dude, he said, I'm so excited that that's in the book. I fact checked it with him. I wanted to make sure, because I say something that he told me about his father, basically, what he described his father. Yeah. Which was, I won't say it here, but it's, it's pretty,
read the book,
pretty freaking Palmer-esque.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I just wanted to make sure you're cool if I put that in there. He's all, fuck yeah.
That's dope. That's dope. So you have unfettered access. We were talking about it before I started the cameras rolling. You've got quotes on the book from Tony Hawk, from Shaun White. Jeremy Jones is writing one. Like we're talking like big time people that you have access to. I'm like going, hey man, like how did you talk to Shaun White? But as you've said already in this interview, you did his first interview.
The first one in Transworld, and then a follow-up one when he was quite young. He might have had like a checkout before that, but the first full-length interview.
Like a Transworld interview where it's multiple pages, the best photos, it's on the cover, Shaun White interview. That's dope.
Yeah, and he knew Craig. And honestly, it's interesting. When I did the interview with Shaun, I asked Shaun at the time, in advance of the interview, I said, hey, I'm going to interview you, but if you had anybody else that you wanted to ask any questions, to who you wanted to have questions asked of you, who would you like it to be? And this is way back when. And he said he'd been hanging out a lot with actually Dave Downing at the time. He said, how about Dave Downing, Tony Hawk, and Craig Kelly? And they all were asked questions in the interview that I wrote. I just threw them out, in the memo. Hey, by the way, these guys would like to ask some questions. And so they had asked him. So I think, he's obviously super busy guy, but he knew who Craig was. A lot of people there at that X Games actually didn't. I mean, I think it was a lot of guys who, I'm not going to say any names right now, but there was some that are big time riders now that were at that X Games, and they're like, I had no idea really who Craig was at that time. I kind of did. He was kind of like the backcountry guy at Burton. So it was already kind of starting to, the younger freestyle kids were so, and Shaun knew.
We were looking forward. I think as a group, that was the mechanism for that was, you were riding in moon boots with neoprene liners, right? Yeah. So we were looking to the future. You weren't checking with people like, hey, what did you used to ride last year? Maybe I'll set that up. It's like, no, have you seen the Burton Two Tongues? These things are insane. Like we were always looking to the future.
Even like Kevin Kinnear, he decides, hey, this is my first issue. I don't know snowboarding. The first question he asked everybody was, tell me about the first time you went snowboarding. And they called that first issue of Transworld the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty, and that was pretty wise of him. Yeah. It all pulled it together. And, did I use that as part of my research? Reading what people said? Heck yeah. Did I talk to Ken Achenbach, who walked up to him and told Kinnear, the inside scoop on all these people walking around, this is, this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so, and that's Damien. He said, he goes bigger. The only guy that goes close to him is Palmer. He said, and his name's, They used to call him Mini Shred, but that's starting to piss him off. I mean, it's just beautiful stuff, time sensitive.
Yeah.
And then he looks at Guy Motil and said, "That's Damien." He said, "If you're shooting in tight, aim your camera about 5 feet higher." He goes huge.
That's amazing.
I mean, that was the stuff that, and I interviewed Kinnear and interviewed Ken, and all these moments of just like, there it was. I think the way I said was, and just like that, Kevin Kinnear was on the inside, and Tom Shea had some competition with ISM.
Right.
And so I tried to hit those moments in history of snowboarding to give some people an understanding of where it came from, with some of the inside people. And it was just fun. I mean, it was a blast. It was like, for me, it was like revisiting the winters of my youth. And to even say that makes me feel old, but I don't feel old. We went snowboarding today. I was like a kid on Christmas, putting on my, just carving turns and having fun. Yeah. And I will do it forever. I mean, there's sometimes when it, like, your body hurts, right?
Hell yeah.
Carving, snowboarding, I feel it doesn't hurt.
No,
like sometimes like
good.
Walking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Snowboarding is easier
I
than walking.
flipped over on some rocks twice in a row, like 2 days ago, and my back is hurting from hitting rocks.
Yeah. Well, there is that. There is that.
I'll probably slow down and not hit rocks in the future. But those carves that we were doing, like, and you're watching, like, the mountain's full of people that are obviously up there to have fun.
Yeah.
Obviously up there because they're in love with the same thing we're in love with.
Yeah.
And we're just peeling through people and riding. And I felt good being up there. It's the beginning of December. It's the start of a season. It's a very, it's such a wonderful cyclical life where it's the start of the season. And then it's the peak of the season. Then it's the springtime. It's kind of fun, slushy, and your body is warmed up, and it's, now it's the end of the year. And now it's, what am I going to do till next year? Maybe I'll go to New Zealand because I can't handle not seeing it. But 100% riding with you up there today was like,
and to come
amazing.
Here where literally the first place I met Craig, kind of.
Yeah.
But first time, eyes on, face to face.
Yeah,
says
in
these
real
things
life.
to us in real life. And I honestly, when we decided to come up here, I wanted to have you up here to show you where I started here in this little world of Southern California that was so frowned upon by like the big mountain riders and whatever. But it's like you work with what you got, like Wisconsin and little mountains,
Minnesota,
upstate New York.
Yeah.
You get it and you love it, and it doesn't matter where it is. To be on the mountain, I don't care if you're skiing at this point. I really
get
don't.
Outside,
get outside, get on the mountain.
Yeah.
And granted, you don't know what's up like a snowboarder does, but it's fun.
Did you have to go away from it for a while? Like when you're researching your, best-selling novels, are you snowboarding in the off seasons of that? Or are you, when Craig passed, did you have a time where you just were like, you know what? I'm taking a fucking knee here for a minute. This, because it was a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
Up until that point, it was just, we were trying to tell ski resorts, we can do this. And then all of a sudden the Olympics are telling us what's going on with snowboarding.
Yeah.
And it was like, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
Really? Go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
Did you ever do a time period away from it where you were just like, I'm burned out on this? Or, Keith Wallace, when I called him, was a telemark skier.
Yeah.
Hey.
Never. Well, first of all, like I said, I've never ever skied except on a split board. Chairs and they're like, fuck no, I can't go down that on skis. I got to switch. I got to transition and be a snowboarder because that's too steep for me. And it was like 15 degrees. But anyways, no, never ever skied. And the only time I've ever taken a break from snowboarding in the season is if I was injured. I mean, I've never felt like I have to stop snowboarding. The one thing that did change after Craig passed away was I wrote like a couple tribute stories to him. One in Couloir magazine, which was a magazine Craig really loved, a little backcountry magazine. And Kurt Hoy asked me to write the tribute piece for Transworld, which I called The Gatekeeper. And a few little shorter things, like more like obituary style things for Outside Magazine and Ski Show Daily, I think. After those articles, I did take a break from writing about snowboarding. I can't remember my last article, but I couldn't have done more than one or two after Craig passed away.
Right.
That was kind of the end of my snowboard writing.
Yeah.
And I went on to my other things and writing, but never would I stop snowboarding. I'll never stop snowboarding. I have a feeling I'll have to stop surfing before I stopped snowboarding.
Wow, really?
Yeah, because I mean, surfing is like, it's, well, maybe I won't be surfing, having to get out through heavy surf, but paddling and stuff and lower back stuff. I broke my back actually a couple of years ago. And,
oh, no.
And, that was a break that I had to take for about 6 months. And the arched back, the paddling, all that surfing, it's a little bit different where I think I can't see myself ever not being able to either split board up something mellow and ride down or get a chairlift and carve. I want to do that. I want to do it till I'm 100.
Sure. Yeah, me too.
But 80 for sure.
Yeah. I remember seeing Rabbit Kakai out in the lineup. I mean, not lineup. He surfed his own little spot on Waikiki. So where all the kooks are over here, we're catching longboard waves over here, and he's ripping it up out there. He must have been in his 70s.
Yeah.
And he just looked spry and happy and in his spot. So
if you don't use it, you'll lose it.
Yeah.
And that's popping up on surfboard and all that, that gets harder where you could always kind of, I think even with injuries and age, I think you could always fake it, with snowboarding and be able to go downhill.
Of course.
And with surfing, the paddle out, eventually at some point I could just foresee, I don't see it right now, but I could foresee that could become harder than it would be just go out and carve or ride powder.
Yeah.
Or, God, maybe I'll be at that point where I can, buy a heli run and, a powder run. I mean, come on, I just don't see ever not being able to ride powder down like a, 25, 30 degrees.
Yeah. Even a tumble bail in powder as an 80-year-old man, I think you'd just be laughing your head off.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. It would be totally worth it.
Yeah. What have we touched on? Early snowboarding, trans world a little bit.
Yeah.
Writing the book and the book.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm feeling like we kind of got it.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I would say that if you wanted to cover any of the, the avalanche itself or not, or what you got out of that.
Right.
I mean,
because, so let me say, I've had Ken Wiley, who's the tail guide from the avalanche at La Traviata, which was actually a game-changing avalanche season in the backcountry, right? It wasn't just the one avalanche in the Revelstoke area. There was another one in the Selkirks that year, right?
Yeah, like 10 days later, it was 7 school kids that were on Rogers Pass that were,
Oh, it was Rogers Pass, so it's across the border, but it's the same mountain range, basically.
Yeah.
And so it was a deadly season.
It was a deadly season, and it was one of the things where it's low likelihood, high consequence season. Mm-hmm. And, my questions were never answered. Writing all those stories about Craig that I wrote about, everybody was always, let's celebrate his life, which is the right thing to do.
Yes.
And let's touch on the avalanche so they know how he was healed.
There was a divide in the guide community.
Yeah.
Because Craig was the very first to try and become a Canadian mountain guide, like an actual.
He was the first to
guide.
be accepted by the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides, the ACMG.
Yeah.
He was the first that they ever allowed to even apply.
Right. And then there's some central characters in the avalanche story that really there was like a hard line divide between these guys that ripped through the community, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a 20-year riff. That's, I mean, I don't want to ruin the book, but there's some stuff in there that really, you did something that no one had ever done. You went to you've said it, you went to SME and talked with the lead guide that was there. It's a very private person. I've reached out to him and no response. Most people, I don't know most people. I don't know anyone else that's actually like looking into it. But he was definitely a closed book.
Yeah.
And there was just a hard line that, if you talk to the mountain guides, they were either on one side or the other.
And honestly, the survivors all had not spoken. And so it was really, to me, you can't, as a journalist, you have to talk to as many people as you can to get all sides of the story. Talking to, Ken Wiley as well, reading his book, which is as a memoir, you're going to get his perspective.
Tail Guide wrote a book. How long after? 2 or 3 years after?
No longer than that. I think it was released in 2014.
Wow. 11 years later.
Yeah. And I thought that was going to give me the answer that I needed to really put Craig
that
to rest.
gave me the answer that I needed. For me, I was like, okay, this is an easy open shut case. I'm on Wiley's side 100%.
Yeah. And I mean, Craig, as we know, he was a chemical engineer dropout. He reverse engineered everything, and he was empathetic during his training as a guide. He would study other incident reports, and some people would look at it and like, it was Buffrey that said, and Lee Usher, I think, told me as well, who was another guide at Baldface. And these are, legends in guiding that said, he was very much a student of the mountains. He would study these things, but he would do it with empathy because he understood what it meant to be in a situation where you're fired up to drop in on something. You've either done your tests or you've looked at the area, you've done whatever, and then you do it. And there are plenty of people who would, die on runs that they had contemplated and or tested. So he was very much trying to learn how to be safer in the mountains with empathy. And I thought, and also not only the empathy, but also with really looking at what went down. And I think that, in short, Rudy was so vilified right off the bat that
Rudy was the lead guide.
Yeah.
So the through line for me always when I was talking with people, because I wasn't talking with people who were there.
Right.
I was talking with people like Buffrey that knew the circumstances, or someone like Ken Achenbach who had a very emotional reaction to the like, hey, it's like such a no-brainer. What Rudy was doing, hiking above the other group, was just like stupid. So fuck that guy.
Yeah.
And I was internalizing this stuff. But then I did have a crack in my armor when I was talking with Savina, and she's like, oh, Rudy, yeah, we had dinner with him last week. And I'm like, wait, isn't he like a villain? Or I'm talking with Kelly Jo, and she's like, fuck no, Craig loved that guy. Craig respected Rudy and really, really wanted to go and see his operation. So I was like in this kind of conflicted space.
I was in a very, very similar, without even that insight, in that I just felt like not even going one way or the direction. I just wanted to get what was going on in his mind. I wanted to fully understand, because nothing that had been printed had gone through what his thought process was.
Right.
What he had done that year with that snow situation. What had the whole snow community done? And so I reached out to neighboring places. What was going on there? I mean, I went every possible direction to understand that season, recreate the snowpack, recreate what was going on mentally, the human factors of the avalanche, and then put it together in a way that tells the whole story, including, most importantly, the perspective from the survivors, many of whom kept their mouth shut for all these years.
For the first time.
Because
this
they didn't
is for
want
the first time that this perspective is being laid
And I
out.
thought, that's how better can I honor Craig, and by just making it a cautionary story. And it would have been so easy to, write a book about Craig and his life and his accomplishments and everything. But is that really the full story?
Right.
Was that really what he would want? I don't think so. I think Craig was such a learner, and so much and so curious that he would have wanted even his own death really looked into, I think, so others could learn. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to, a lot of people will come into this story because they want to read about the avalanche, and they're going to leave loving Craig Kelly.
Hell yeah. Wow.
And so it's, it's a balance, but I will just say that it's the most, detailed reenactment of an avalanche tragedy, I think, that I've ever read.
Yes.
Because a lot of people shy away from a lot of it. And, it'll be a tough read for some people.
Yep.
It'll be a tough read for almost anybody at some parts, but it's also such an inspiring story because he was such a great guy.
Yeah.
For so many people.
Yeah. It broke me a couple of times.
Yeah.
It
broke me right in it. I mean,
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
So anyways, I'm just honored to be here, and that you latched on to Craig as a subject all these years with your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's just, you couldn't have a better North Star, compass for all of us. I mean, he was the compass pointing the way for so many people. And I'm just stoked that it's out there. I'm happy it's over, in a way, but I'm also every writer holds their breath about, just like, the Hatches have said, they're waiting, they're watching every with the premiere, and are they going to laugh at the right places? Are they going to like hold their breath at the right places? It's the same thing with the book,
of course.
And you want people to, appreciate the work that you've done, but you also want to honor your subjects. And that's exactly what I hope this book does.
Dude, I was so blown away that what kind of an amazing coincidence it is that snowboarding has an award-winning writer with the wherewithal to and the deep history with Craig even to take on a project that really, without you, I don't think it would ever be told. Wow. I just don't think it could. I don't think anyone would want to touch it because they don't have the first of all, the writing ability. You're an award-winning author, and it shows in this book. I think you're going to win some fucking awards with this. I really do, actually.
If I do, I'm going to accept every one of them for Craig.
Yeah.
I mean, Buffrey and a few people have said that as far as the guiding, just the fact that they're happy that somebody did it who knew something about avalanche safety, who knew snowboarding, knew Craig, and at the end of the day, I think that I think it's just really important that the story got out there. I honestly thought somebody that knew Craig better, like maybe like Galbraith or somebody who is a writer and knew Craig. Mm-hmm. But he actually even said, when I interviewed him a few times, he even said, I'm too close to Craig. And that's what a couple of guides I spoke with, of the guys I talked to, I interviewed probably 30 different guides, and not all of them wanted to go on the record with their names told but they said, I want the story to be told right. Right. And I'm going to tell you this, but some of my opinions aren't so popular with this, and it's a tight community. Yeah. And they don't they want the truth told, but I didn't necessarily, I always wanted to make sure people who, if it's something very serious, I want to make sure they're the name attached. Otherwise, it's kind of bullshit. I mean, come on. When the New York Times says, anonymous source says this, it's oh yeah, sure, whatever. Yeah. I don't buy it. Sorry, get a source that's going to stand on the record. Right. And the stuff that you have in here that I say is on the record, and multiple people would cover it. And most of the guides that said it, they said, dude, nobody would touch this. There's so much heat and so much, it's such a polarizing topic. Right. But it's also so close to our hearts that they said they're glad it's finally being done. And some people, I think one or two people said, shouldn't we just let this go? Right. I could see that. Shouldn't we let this go? That was a big divide too. That would be a part of the big divide. Let's honor this guy. Let's move on and do it. We know what happened, and we're happy with letting it go. We're doing better as a community now than we were doing then. Yeah. And that was a catalyst, and it was tragic, and let's honor those people by just being quiet. And and I answered that question right there, and I heard that so many times. And the truth is, we know this story. When you said that, you know what I said? No, you don't. Bang. That's it. No, you don't know the story. This is, you know why? You know part of the story. Because nobody was competent enough that was a writer, and Galbraith, I don't know how well he rides, whatever, to go to this is the thing. I don't think we're giving away anything in the book by saying where Craig passed wasn't just anywhere. It wasn't just like a fun day at a catboarding place. This is Rudy Beglinger runs SME is what is it? Selkirk Mountain Experience. And it's a very exclusive club. Physically, you're going to do 6,000 vertical feet of self-propelled climbing per day if you're going to join their group. And I will tell you right now that I had my ass kicked. I mean, that was a tough week. That's like a Jeremy Jones, Travis Rice. Yeah, those guys would skate through it. They would skate through it, and they would feel like their bodies would feel like they did something for sure. They could do it, but in general, you get helicoptered in, and you're there, and then you have a guide, and you tour for every ounce of vertical, and it's which hard. Is something that Craig was thinking about maybe doing. That's what he wanted to do. Right, and 6,000 vertical a day is it's a big day. It's a big day. Your body knows you did something at the end of that day. Yeah, it's like you get back to the lodge, and I'm like, do I want to have a sauna or do I want to lay down before dinner? Right. And that's the base of Cypress Mountain to the top of Skychart. That's most of that we drive a road up. Right.
You know,
Yeah,
that's
and I mean,
a lot
and
of
again,
vertical.
the people. I mean, Joey Vosberg and Eric Layton and these guys that do this stuff. It's it's not a big day. But I came from. I will. You have to say altitude's the problem, right?
Sure.
So yeah,
sure.
I came from sea level.
Yep.
And I got there one day in advance, having done, my training was more, lower altitude, and snowboarding is great. I mean, I could handle anything going down there.
Yes.
No problem. But I was always at the back of the line going up, and I was gracious about it. I mean, I'm sorry, the guides were gracious about it. I was apologetic about it.
Sure. Of course.
But the thing is, at the end of the day, you couldn't understand the dynamics of that operation
right.
without experiencing it. And in the epilogue of the book, I explained some of the things that I thought, wait a minute, don't these people know this or that? And then after you do it, you realize you're not really sitting there listening to what the guides are saying on the radio. You're thinking about fucking getting up the hill and grabbing a quick snack, transitioning. You're not paying attention to what's going on. And so when some people would say, but no one remembers this being said, I'm like, I was just there a week ago, and I don't remember or I was there yesterday, and I can't remember what he said yesterday.
Right.
And so for a while I would think that's not possible. How can I discount this part of the story?
To see it. Yeah.
By no one remembers anything like this being said.
Right.
And I'm like, well, yeah, it makes sense having been there. And I wouldn't have known that had I not gone.
That's the beauty of the book, is that you went deep, dude.
Yeah.
And thank you for doing it, because you've done such a wonderful job on this particular project.
Yeah.
I
appreciate it. Thank you very much. I will take that, and I will take it. But because it's, I say this with every single book, and it probably sounds cheesy, but it's my book, but it's their story. And it's very true. Without that type of a subject matter, and not without these people who opened up their hearts to recount the darkest day of their lives,
truth,
it would not be what it is. So I thank everybody who took the time to talk to me. And I thank all the people who talked to me for hours, and not a bit of what they talked about is in the book, because that's just the nature of the beast. Yeah. I tried to thank everybody. I will say, if anybody is not thanked in the acknowledgments that I failed to thank, call me on it and let me get it in the paperback, because I tried to keep track of everybody, but there were so many people I spoke to. I'm sure I forgot one or two people, but I tried to thank everybody, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for you for reading it. And
dude, I was just so honored to have a advanced copy. I just felt like I was in a different world. Awesome. I'm like, I can't believe that I would call you and be like, holy shit, I'm at this part. I can't fucking believe this. Yeah. And you would be like, dude, keep reading. Yeah. Keep reading.
Well, I think I just got that text. I don't think Mark would mind saying this tonight, but I got a text from Mark Gallup today.
Yep.
And he said, because I gave him an advanced copy recently. He's on the chapter that basically is when the avalanche is about to occur. And he wrote me and said, I'm going to take a little break at this point. It's stirring up a few unsettled emotions, and it's an emotional read. He was a close friend of Craig.
Yeah. So. Mark was on the show and talked all sorts of amazing Craig stories.
Yeah. There's a lot of, again, I had to make a decision on what to put in there. And at the end of the day, I thought, you know what? And I talked to the survivors, and they said, tell it like it happened. The stuff, keep it like it happened. It's been long enough. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I mean, thank you for so many things. Thank you for the years that you did at Transworld, and because you worked on issues, and I was in one, you worked on the founding, history of snowboarding, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And the documenting of snowboarding, and the partnering of snowboarding with brands and companies that believed in it,
Yeah.
Sure, I was I can remember opening up and seeing a Ford motor car ad and being like, okay, that's it for me. I'm not reading these magazines anymore. They're 500 pages thick, and they're just but in hindsight, fucking Ford was stoked on snowboarding. They're like, we're going to support snowboarding and pay this money to have a 2-page spread in this snowboard magazine. Like, that's kind of fucking badass, actually.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, it's just the nature of anything where it's going to eventually go mainstream. And the people who are in on anything at an early stage, just like me watching, coveting, watching Endless Summer or,
Yes.
and there'd been a lot of movies before that, but
Tons.
we all focus on that because that was the one that kind of really reached the mainstream.
Yes.
Or like Gidget or whatever. And I
Sure.
look back and I'm like, God, how cool would it have been to be able to roll up to Cardiff Reef and have these guys going out, with dinghies going after lobster and like 2 other people out at Cardiff Reef.
Unreal.
And be stoked to see them. And that's really what it was. We were, at that time, you see somebody on a snowboard at a mountain and you were literally stoked. You wanted to see what their bindings looked like. At least that was the first thing I would look at. You want to see how their bindings are because yours probably, there was always crappy shit going on. You wanted to improve your bindings. You wanted to see what they're riding. You wanted to see how they rode. And at the end of the day, you wanted to just, shake their hand or give them a high five, a shaka, whatever it was, to say, hey, you're part of my family.
Yep.
And I think I'd love to end it that way, really. Like I think of, I've never been to the bank slalom, for instance, but I'll watch the videos I've been to places where I'll be in a group of snowboarders doing something and you're in that environment and you're with other brothers and sisters that know snowboarding and especially even the ones at our age. And you look at them and I've always thought, that, it's like, I don't know you, but I know you. And that's what snowboarding has done for me around the world.
Yeah.
Around the world. In Iran, it was like a metaphor for change in that country. You'd see these kids, they're Iranian kids snowboarding, and you have this link, this common bond anywhere you go. And a common experience. It's it's that you all know what it feels like to feel like you ripped your ass open at one point in your life. You know what I mean? When you were learning, there's nobody that has not like gone into the bathroom and thought, geez, I don't know.
Yeah.
If I hurt something. I mean, everybody has experienced a fly swatter at one point.
Yeah.
It's like you've gone through that. And then at the same time, you've had a powder day. You've had whatever. You've had that first air. You've had that first time when you actually was able to tweak out your, or, just whatever it is.
The day you got up early and you got first chair.
Yeah.
These amazing
and
events
we
with
all
friends.
know what that's like. And I think, I see all these kids and I have to hold myself back like, God, I really miss how it was.
Yes.
But then think of, it's a feeling that how couldn't you want to share it?
Yeah, it's still like that. Those kids we saw today.
They were
I'm
stoked.
a moto guy and I don't usually do this, but I'm ready to break myself off.
But I'm doing, and then what did his buddy say? He said, "Dude, he's doing so good."
Yeah,
Two kids.
Yeah. Same dynamic as years and years and years ago.
Yeah, and it's so that just to have anything like that, and again, something that is not, you're not sitting here saying, "Hey, dude, did you sit in your room and play Fortnite all night?" No.
Right.
You're outside.
You see me dunk on that guy with that message or whatever. It's not phone based anything. You're outside enjoying life.
You're in the world. You're in the
Connected
mountains.
To the world.
And
anyway, then yeah.
Thank you, everybody out there. And and a couple other people like Mark Fawcett. I interviewed about like one of Craig's early trips. There was Heath Lockhurst told me about a trip with Craig. All these buildups of things that Matt Scholl. Just people that had these moments. So many people had a moment with Craig that made him being in that aura, that his spirit that you got to experience. And I think that hopefully that his spirit kind of reside in the pages of that book with all the rest of it. And I don't know. I just hope it brings people together. I know it's a dark topic of what it is, but in that darkness, there is light. And that's really what I hope we spread. I'm going to shut up about the book. It's been my life. I've been in a cave for 5 years, and
love it.
It's we can see the light of day, and I'm excited about it.
Well, thank you for doing the show. Thanks for having me at this wonderful cabin in Big Bear Lake. Like, thanks for driving up, picking me at the LA airport, and just thanks for a life well lived in snowboarding.
Right on, Eric.
Yeah.
Knuckles.
Yeah, thanks, Omi.
Take care.
That was great. FNRad shoutouts this week to Eric Blehm and his family for the invite to their amazing cabin and the subsequent talks on the chairlift, in the car, at the restaurant, and on the mic. Special thanks to Rachel, Eric's agent at HarperCollins, who's given us a few copies of The Darkest White to give out as prizes to FNRad listeners. So here's how you win.
Tag FNRad, Eric Blehm Official, and Harper Collins, plus 2 friends who should read the Craig Kelly story, The Darkest White. That's it. I'll pick a winner or 2 soon, and Rachel will send you your copy. Tag NewGreens for a free organic green juice sample, or tag 1910 in any FNRad post for a chance to win a 1910 hoodie. Thanks for listening, and be sure to come back next week for another episode of FNRad Snowboarding, presented by Skyview Campers and brought to you by FNRad Productions.